to be here to introduce our first panel of our first virtual Washington Writers Conference. My name is Carrie Callaghan. I'm an author of historical fiction, also a senior editor with the Washington Independent Review of Books. And I love these conferences, and I'm so glad that you all can be here today, both to learn and also to support the Washington Independent, which is such an important voice in book reviewing. Before I introduce tonight's panelists, I just want to go over a little bit of meeting reminders. Of course, everyone, please keep yourselves muted. If there's a question that you have, we would really love to hear your questions, but please ask that by typing in the chat. We have a great team that's going to be collecting those questions throughout the course of the panel. So whenever the question comes to mind, go ahead and put it in the chat, and they're going to catalog it for us to deal with on the panel. So you don't have to hold questions to the end. A little bit of conference housekeeping. I understand that a lot of folks are really eager to know when your agent pitch schedule is. We're still working to get that set up, so don't worry, we're not going to have it for you today, but the hope is to send schedules out to you later this week. So with no further ado, it is my honor to introduce our three fabulous panelists tonight. And hopefully everybody's going to be able to see them. If you can't, maybe type it in the chat and one of our other moderators will be able to help you. So first we have Sam Hiyate of The Rights Factory, and he represents adult YA nonfiction and fiction. I'm going to briefly introduce each of the panelists. They're going to tell you more about their wish lists, just to let you know. Then we have Gina Panettieri of Talcott Notch Literary. She represents adult YA children's fiction and nonfiction. And finally, Rita Rosenkranz of the Rita Rosenkranz Literary Agency. She represents almost exclusively adult nonfiction titles. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. I know that this is extra work, so it means a lot to me that you're willing to share your perspective with our attendees. Let's start off with kind of the big basic question. What does an agent do? Why should an author want an agent? And I'm going to call on each of you in turn. Oh, sorry, before we start on that question, I want to give the audience a little bit of feel for how we're going to run this tonight. We're going to begin with about 30 to maybe 45 minutes of moderator-driven Q&A. Then we're going to have some time for your questions. Then we have three very brave audience volunteers who are going to stand up, so to speak, and give their pitches to the agent panel here. And we're going to hear some feedback. Interspersed between those pitches, we're going to continue to have Q&As. So please, again, keep the questions coming. We really are here for you tonight. So with that housekeeping out of the way, Sam, can you tell us what does an agent do? Why should anybody want to have an agent?
So that's a good question. I think there are some people that are really good business people and actually are, would be great publishers. And those people, when they self-publish, are successful. But most other people who just want to be writers, it's in their best interest to have an agent, because our job is to basically help you have time to write and do all the stuff that's important to you, so that we manage the rest of it, which is, we at our agency, we do a lot of editing on manuscripts, because we don't want to take any chances. When we submit it, we want to get a deal for you. So we edit, we negotiate the contract, and we make sure that it's not just that you get one publisher that controls everything, which is often something you could do on your own if you're assuming your writing is good enough. But our job is to figure out how you can actually make money in multiple formats and countries, and things like adaptations in film and TV. Now's a really good time because of all the streaming channels that are opening up, that there's never been so many projects being optioned, and you're probably seeing it every time you look at Netflix or anywhere on TV where it says based on the novel by. So Hollywood has no imagination, and they want to adapt your books rather than taking a chance and doing something creative. Unless you're Christopher Nolan, he seems to be able to be fine coming up with his own stuff. But essentially, an agent is like your partner and your collaborator in this whole enterprise of making money through your writing.
Thank you. And I noticed people are confused by the fact that we're having pitches tonight. I want to clarify, this is absolutely a panel to talk about queries. We're going to be focusing heavily and in the nitty-gritty of queries. So don't worry, that is the focus of tonight. But because we had so much enthusiastic volunteer interest in pitching, we siphoned off a few of the pitches from Thursday to happen today. Thank you. So Gina, can you tell us what an agent does and why somebody should want an agent?
Oh, sure. I agree with everything Sam said. Absolutely, those are all part of the role of agenting. A big service that we offer is the career oversight, the whole arc of your career. When I take somebody on, I know there's some agents who just take on a book, but I think the most of us want to take on an author for the long haul, for the career. So it's important for you to have a conversation with the agent early on about where you envision yourself being, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What do you want to get out of this relationship? We can give you a lot of advice as to how to handle the development of your career, which I think is very important, to have the goal, be able to visualize the goal and understand what it takes to get to the end point you want to achieve. We're also very good at managing the relationships you have with your publisher and keeping you out of the hot water. We'll take the bullet instead, which can mean a lot of difference. I've seen so many writers kind of shoot themselves in the foot by being disagreeable. So we can kind of be in the middle and keep things calm. And I think that's an important part of what we do. We're kind of on touch with what's trending, where things are going, and we can advise you whether the direction you're heading in is actually going to be viable, 3 years from now or 5 years from now, or is that market just disappearing? Is it maybe time, if you have the inclination and the capability, to sort of shift course a bit, and we can help kind of guide you in that direction. I have a lot of authors come to me with a YA manuscript and an adult thriller and something else, and and they want to talk to me about, well, where should I go? What should I work with now? And so we can sit down and talk to you about of everything you've got going on, of all these works in progress you've got going on, where really should you be putting your time and your energy? So I think career management is really what I think is a very strong consideration for what you need to get out of an agent relationship. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. And finally, Rita.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'd say I'd handle this just a little bit differently. Agents come in all shapes and sizes, as do authors. Authors lean on me differently. Some have great foreknowledge of this industry and how it can bruise you and how it can bless you. And they understand that going in. Others are newbies. They're virginal. They know nothing except they've written a good book that's possibly saleable. And so I do have to step in differently with each author based on their prior knowledge, how much hand-holding they need, optimally not too much. And I can get on with the better, higher task of selling their work and, yes, managing career, whether it is one book, and I'm happy if that one book is a big book, it's been worth my effort, or a series of books, all tied to nonfiction, since that's my emphasis. But what I'm frequently called to do is to troubleshoot, to step in. And those authors who keep me abreast in real time, I can troubleshoot. I can get into the debate and sort it out. And by the way, that doesn't always mean agreeing with the author. I'm not here as a yes woman, but rather to offer an educated perspective on what makes sense, whatever the problem is. And I would hope by then I've established enough trust with the author so that they realize that what I'm saying is truthful and in their interest, and that they will listen actively and with luck agree. But it's not always easy, because some do have a certain prejudice along certain lines, or aesthetic or notion that needs to be sorted through. And but communication, I will say, is the key, and it works both ways. But ideally, what Gina was saying, the great thing about working with an author beyond that book, and especially if you've got the same editor in place, by then there's a shorthand. You don't have to go through the elementary stages of getting to know you. You're in the groove and you can get on with that higher achievement of good publishing.
That's great.
Agents
Thank
are
you.
important. A good agent especially important.
Thank you, all three of you. Those were really good answers and they layered on one another well. And I wanted to start with that because this panel is about queries, but there's no point in querying an agent if you don't understand what an agent does and why you want an agent. So now let's roll up our sleeves and really get into talking about queries. I've got a number of very detailed questions for you all, so I do kind of want to take this step by step, starting with the beginning of a query. A lot of people talk about queries as being structured with the hook, the book, and the cook. Whether or not you agree with that formulation, let's just sort of keep that in our minds and we'll talk about it later. So let's start at the very beginning. What sort of first sentence do you like to see in a query? What information do you want to hit your eyeballs right away? And let's start with Gina.
Okay, I tell my students all the time that what I need to see the minute I open your query is I need to see motives, stakes, and conflict. I need to understand those. And if you can roll those all into one log line, we're probably going to get along. If any of those three elements are missing from the query entirely, I'm probably not going to have a whole lot of interest in the book. So motive, stakes, and conflict.
Great, thank you. Rita, what about you? And you're going to have, I think, maybe in some cases, a slightly different take on queries because of your nonfiction focus. So please let us know.
Well, let us just assume that every major category is very crowded. It's all very noisy. So my log line is I look for familiar topics presented freshly and lesser known topics presented commercially. If you can figure out the dynamic of your material that fits that groove and present it in a way that is energetic and captivating, you've gotten my attention. I certainly will give it the worthy read, but it has to stand out from everything else. And very often there's a project that is worthy, but way too familiar, and the author doesn't bring enough street cred to it. So maybe good idea lost on the wrong author, etc. I know we'll get into the weeds later on, but I need to feel the pulse of the work based on certain elements being present in that query letter. Sometimes the word count is way too large, and that's a disincentive because I know that just from a production point of view, it's going to be way too obese and expensive and make the audience rarefied if it's too expensive. I'm thinking that far ahead just when I see word count, unless something very, very special is happening. So, and also that the author is well paired to the topic. So I don't have to explain why is this author writing this book, that you've presented your connection to it. It might be for personal reasons that are valuable and verifiable and valid, and that's enough. That can be enough. But if it's an esoteric project, I need to know that you've researched it thoroughly. You have new material that no one else has had access to, that you've presented a reason for being, a good argument for the book. You've defended it in a one-page letter. You haven't gone on, and you haven't been unclear, because I think that's actually a fairly common condition where the author is not explaining the project well enough. And I really don't know what they're selling me. It's a real shame. I mean, they've wasted my welcome mat. And I'm not going to give them a second chance, rarely. Maybe if there's one ingredient in that letter that sparks, and then I'm feeling generous at the time. But I agree that your pitch, whether it's on the page or in person, has to captivate. You've got to make the connection, and you've got to do it smartly, sensibly, succinctly, in a way that conveys the essence of the work.
Thank you, Sam. when you open a query and you see that very first sentence, what are you looking for in just that first sentence?
My favorite one is when somebody's looked me up, or they know they refer to a book that I've already done, and they say, I really like this book, and I feel because of that book you might like my book. So I'm looking for a connection with this random person who is trying to get my attention. And I may be different than these Rita and Gina in that I'm kind of a generalist. Like I did my first picture book after 18 years of being an agent recently. And that was kind of random, but it was fun. And I've done, graphic novels and crime, serious genre crime, and then a lot of literary stuff that is really hard to explain. So I'm looking for, I think, voice when I look at a manuscript, and I know that most writers haven't really perfected their query. So I give people a kind of a pass on not having a perfect query, because what concerns me is how good they are on the page. So for our agency, I always say, send some chapters so I can look at it. So sometimes I'll even, if the query is kind of boring, but there's something about it that's interesting, if one thing catches my eye, I will look at the sample and look at the first page right away. I don't want to miss anything. So I also read for the other agents, because I get a lot of stuff, and I have a lot of newer agents who aren't as well known. So if there's a middle grade thing that comes in, I might consider sending it to one of our children's agent if it meets their sensibility. So I'm actually reading for the whole agency and not just my own taste. And I feel like if you've made the effort to write a great book, you may not have made the same effort to write a great query, which I hate to say it, but it takes almost as much work. and so I'm going to give you a pass on that. But I do want to see, like, why are you talking to us? Like, what is it about our agency, or what is it about my list or somebody else's list, or something that I've said, or why us? And then if I don't get that, I might still look at it, but I'll be looking secondly for like comparables in the market, because I'd like to know, even if you might be wrong, I want to know how you see yourself fitting into the market.
Great, thank you. Really good advice, and it's nice that you all are so kind with authors who are often confused by this mystifying querying process, but hopefully today we'll explain it a little bit more. I think a couple of you mentioned a log line or a hook. Tell me what you think that is. That's not always self-evident to people. What is a hook? I'll start with you, Rita.
It's referred to as the elevator ride hook, 25 words or less, that compressed experience of the book in a sentence, maybe. This will tell the story of the underappreciated founder of this corporation in a way that will have us rethink history. It's that bold, fill in the specifics. It's that bold and important sounding. And I have access to the archives that have been unavailable for 25 years since the death of. All right, so right away I know there's something special going on here, and that not everyone could have written it. There's a very proactive author who's deeply interested in a subject that we should all know about and wants to share it and has done due diligence. That conveys intention and expertise and originality and importance. So, again, my list, I call it an omnivore's delight, because it's every major nonfiction category and then some. I did a book, Survival Guide to Landlocked Mermaids. Can't say there are many of those around. So I do like books that have charm and wit and differentiation and can't be cloned easily, that they're singular. An author brings a particular vision, resourcefulness, competency to the case. And that log line, if you will telegraph it.
Wonderful, thank you. I just realized an important bit of moderator business I forgot to mention is that we're being recorded. So everyone, please keep that in mind. Sam, can you tell us what you think of what a hook or a log line is for you?
Essentially, a log line is just a way to get your attention. So if it's like, ideally, I mean, a lot of them are framed like a question, but it doesn't have to be a question, because the question is the easiest way to get you to say, okay, you know, give me more, or that sounds interesting, tell me more. But the idea is, if you can frame your story in such a way that you kind of give us, I think Gina had a great summary of it, which is if you give us the kind of the stakes for the character, what the motives are, and what the central conflict is, you have a sense of where the story is going to go. But you never want to give too much away. You kind of want to tell enough that so somebody says, oh my God, that sounds awesome. What happens next? Some of the, I remember at the Frankfurt Book Fair a few years ago, there was a screenwriter that had the biggest book that was pitched, and it was like a multi-million-dollar deal. And the idea was the pitch, the log line, it wasn't even a log line. It was just a very simple pitch. And it was this, it was this person ends up going through a wormhole into like an alternate version of reality. And they find themselves in a really dark, dangerous version of the world that they're used to. And that world is ours. And then they have to figure out how to get back home. So everybody's like, oh my God, I want to read that book. Like, what are they used to? Why is this more dark and dangerous? So they kind of framed it in a way where everybody's like, okay, that's really engaging. So there's a good example of a log line or a pitch.
That's a great example. Yeah, Gina, do you want to add anything?
Well, Rita and Sam have done a terrific job of explaining like what we need to see. I'm going to suggest some things that maybe people shouldn't do that I see all the time. I get queries in where people are using theme. The book has these following 42 themes in it. That's nice, but then so what? You know, so I need to go beyond that. I mean, it's nice later in the query if you want to discuss themes. What I think has been working very, very well lately, if it's done just right, is to posit your book as it is X meets Y set in Z locale, you know, so that we can get an idea. And this is super traditional to do it this way. So we can get a really good idea. You have to pick those comps very, very well. So is it because of the voice of this book and the conflict of that book and the unique setting of this other one? But you'll see that frequently if you read the publisher's marketplace, the deal lists, or especially for books that went to auction, it'll be like the book was pitched as X meets Y. Don't just pick the two biggest hits of the year and decide and try to say your book is a combination of these two things. It has to make sense. Later in the query, you can explain your comps and why you think that those comps are absolutely appropriate. But that can sometimes give us a really good idea, like in a nutshell, of where you think you're going with the book, or what the audience is going to be, what the reader, you know, what the reader's going to expect of it. So just kind of keep that in mind in addition to everything else. But again, you know, with logline, look at like the motives, the stakes, and then the conflict, and see where what's going to propel this story, what's going to be the narrative engine that's driving this story, and how is it unique. Don't make it dull. Don't make it use details, use specific details. Don't go very general thinking it'll sound more like we have a wider readership. No, give me specifics as to why this book, why this conflict, you know, make us feel the excitement that Sam was talking about. What is the intrigue? Why are we going to absolutely have to pick up the book and read it? I know I'm asking an awful lot for the first 25 words. I'm sorry. That's what we need.
Well, that's partly what makes queries so difficult. But I think the reason it's worth belaboring this is because actually from a writer's standpoint, queries are really tremendously useful. They help you think about whether your manuscript is structured appropriately, because if the cool, exciting hook to your book doesn't happen until 85% in, you know, that might be a problem with the work. Sorry, I'm editorializing. So Gina, you asked about, or you mentioned comp titles. I want to talk a little bit more about that. And actually, if you all don't mind, I'm going to share a little embarrassing story about when I started querying. I thought comp titles were supposed to be books that I liked. And so I comped War and Peace, which is, yeah, I know. I'm so embarrassed. So tell everybody why War and Peace is a terrible comp title, and what comp titles you're looking for, and how do you feel about non-book comp titles? Because I know that that's something that comes up. So Sam, we'll start with you.
I use non-book comp titles a lot, actually. I once sold a book to Random House, and I said, imagine if Charlotte from Sex and the City became a kind of Indiana Jones, but with plants rather than architectural objects. And the editors are like, oh my God, I want to read that. So I took a character from a TV show out of 4, put her in a position where nobody from Sex and the City has ever gone. And that was intriguing enough that, you know, they said, I want to see that. The goal that we have once you've got a great manuscript or proposal is to get those editors to say, oh my God, I want to see this, because they're being pitched 30 other things that day, and you want to be the one that they actually reserve that first hour of their reading, whether that's later that night or first thing in the morning, whenever they fit it in, to be your book, and then you get your shot at it. And so I feel like books are good when they're kind of you know, in the canon, or even if they're successful in the kind of the modern world. But I feel like film and TV is even better. So I use them more often than not. I mean, sometimes I'll use, I sold a book recently saying it was like Huckleberry, it was Huckleberry Finn, but for kids, and everybody got that. Sorry, for girls. So it was like, because Huck Finn is boys, and you know, having that a modern day Huck Finn for girls was a really easy thing, because we know that story. So I'm the thing that I was saying earlier about how I want to see where it fits into the market. What I meant comps. I meant that you could find comparables. It's very dangerous to use the biggest comparables you can find, because it also establishes a standard that is going to be almost impossible for you to meet. So what you almost need to do is find a character or a way that somebody is writing to say, you know, the humor of this person, or the, you know, I don't know. I think somebody once got my attention because I read a lot of Haruki Murakami, and they said it has the kind of thing of Murakami with this. And I said, you know what? I don't know that you can be Murakami, but I'll take a chance. If you feel confident enough to say that, I'll take a look at what you have. And unfortunately, they didn't meet the Murakami standard, so that it failed in that case. So it's a slippery slope. You can set too high a standard when you use those comps sometimes.
Great, thank you, Gina.
I totally agree with everything Sam said, and I totally want to read your whole list, Sam. Absolutely, I do. At this point, I do. I agree that it's sometimes easier to express what you want by using non-book comps. I pitched a book recently that went very, very well, and then film rights went really fast, by saying it was Silence of the Lambs meets The Matrix. And everybody was like, okay, that sounds cool. You know, so you can get across something. Now, what you need to do with these comps is you need to use comps that almost everyone is going to recognize what you mean. Don't go super esoteric, because I see people who come to me and I have to go and research what they're talking about, because it's some obscure Netflix documentary that 5 people saw, and I have no idea what they're talking about. So using comps that are recognizable, that will create an instant understanding, is very, very important. Whether they're books, whether they're TV shows, whether, you know, it's a person, just a larger than life, real life character. You could say, imagine if, you know, so and so was in this situation. So you can comp them in a lot of different ways. The whole end result has to be that you're creating an instant understanding for the agent or the editor as to where you're going with this, and they're going to get that aha moment. But you have to pick them right. You have to pick them correctly. It can't just be the biggest, flashiest, most successful in whatever genre you're working in. That's because yes, that's not going to work. You're not going to live up to that, and it's probably also not correct. It's probably also not, or either that, or you've done something. You've created a piece of work that is so derivative that we don't want to see it anyway. So yeah, use anything you want. Absolutely. If it's a big event, so as long as it's something that we can recognize. Hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, thank you. Rita, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and also I'll add in a sub question that came to mind. I've heard authors debate whether or not they need to have recent titles to show that they are on top of the market. Can you, maybe address that as well?
Yes, well, because I'm handling mostly nonfiction, I'm not going to do the same kind of comping that both agents have talked about. I will expect my author to have a comparative title component to the book proposal, where ideally the titles featured are the last 5 years or so, because first of all, there will be book scan numbers, there'll be trackable numbers by the editors looking at those comp titles to see whether or not, in fact, the comp titles have been successful well enough to want to do another book in that genre. So there is, and in fact, the few times where I've been straining for comp titles that have been recent, for whatever reason, it's been called to my attention by editors who really wanted to know if there was something more recent so that they could track them and really get a hold on that subcategory. So I recommend that. I think most editors are looking for that. And so that's what I would most ideally have. But I agree with Gina to the degree that if you're using comp titles and the intersection of those titles creates a new hook that differentiates the book and excites the reader, well, fabulous. That's half the battle, as we've experienced, getting instant interest because it's such an exciting combo, one that isn't expected perhaps, and that is a new way of seeing something. So, and I just wanted to, unless you're going to get to it, Carrie, later on, there are some questions in the chat.
We are going to get to them, but if there's something that calls out to you that's relevant to what we're talking about, please feel free to chime in.
Well, only what constitutes an obese manuscript. And, I appreciate, I shouldn't use words like that just, freely. I should be a little bit more detailed. And I think that, and here again, comp titles might come into play because most genres have a normal length. And, there are exceptions to the rule, and I don't want to necessarily even issue this as a rule. But if you have a 200,000 word manuscript, it will be unusually long. And some publishers are less afraid of that. But as I said earlier, it means that if they publish something like that, the price point is, unless it's a very, very large print run, the price point will be high. And by definition, rarefy the audience. So we do look for a kind of regularity when it comes to page count, word count. And it also suggests that the author is paying attention to what is regular for that genre. And in fact, maybe an earlier point I should have made is that the more you are studied within your genre, you understand what the normal is for your genre. Now, you might want to actively defy it for whatever personal or professional set of reasons, but know the genre that you're writing for. That will help you understand better your reader and engage your reader more readily. I think it is, if not an obligation of the author, it's just a very good thing to understand, the category in which you're writing and the expectations within that category.
That's great, thank you. Let's just touch a little bit on word count here. Generally, I think people can Google what normal word counts are, so I won't ask you to get into that. But briefly, and I'll just ask any of you who want to answer this just to raise your hand. Do you want to know, this is the question I get a lot, do you want to know the title and word count at the beginning of a query or at the end, or does it not matter? People get worked up about these details. So anyone have thoughts? Yeah, Rita? Rita, you're still muted.
Ideally, the query letter is 1 page, 2 paragraphs, 2.5 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. It doesn't run much longer than that. I have experienced exceptions that have been successful because I've been captivated and I continue with it, but you should be able to get it on the page. And since it is 1 page, I think wherever it is on that page, if we're interested, we'll get to it. But generally speaking, I want to know what it is that I'm being pitched and then how the author is connected to that work. So that would be the natural order. I don't feel that the regulations are absolute, and you can play with it a bit and still have that succinct query that captivates. But make sure it's not at the third page of your pitch letter, because by then we'll have gotten distracted, very, very possibly. And, again, we read for a living, we're generous readers, but we are also time challenged. And I think I should have said that up front. I mean, time is a real quantity in our lives. The day is long. However generous we can be, please be respectful of our time. And that even comes down to a query letter.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We've talked about the hook, a little bit about the book part of the query. Now let's talk about the cook. How much do you want to know about an author in a query, and what don't you want to know? So Gina.
I want to know what's relevant to the book. I want to know if you have, and to my ability to sell the book. If you have, you've done original research on your nonfiction, and so that's, super buzzable. How did you do that? Do you have a huge following in fiction? Are you already like massively good at networking? I don't need to know your marital status. I don't necessarily need to know the number of pets that you have, or, just let me know what is relevant to this published experience that you're going to have. Perhaps, later on, when we ask for more information about the book, you can give me a full paragraph about where you went to college and why that's relevant, because you can hook into the alumni society or whatever. And that's more in your platform. But I just need to know why this book? So if you could narrow that down, is there something really unusual about you that informed the writing of the story? So because sometimes my authors, when I read their bios, I'm like, they're fascinating people, and there's an awful lot that they bring to the table that I can feel in the story. Now I understand where that came from. Now that I've read their bio, I understand where that came from. I understand that they had the same background as the protagonist did, or they work in a field that informs this. They were a police detective and they're writing mysteries, or they're a nurse and they're writing a medical mystery, or something like that. So that I need to know. But there's an awful lot of the small stuff, the day-to-day stuff, I really don't need to know at all.
Thank you, Rita.
I would agree. Keep it relevant. Keep it short.
That's great. And Sam, do you have anything to add?
I think every bio for an author is basically the same question, which is, why are you the best author for this book?
Great. And sometimes the answer might be as simple as, there's very little to say about yourself, right? I mean, for some works of fiction, there might not be a clear answer, right?
Well, fiction, it might be a little bit different in that, I would look to see if where you've published. Ideally, you've published before in lit mags if you're writing a literary book, or, nobody. It's very rare that somebody who's unpublished in any way will get an agent. We want to know that you've already, even if it's like a letter to the editor, and then an essay somewhere, or even for fiction writers, it's important that we know that you want to engage with readers, in any format.
Okay. This is another quick question, but it's something that comes up. How many characters do you want to see mentioned in a query? And I think we can use the word characters also for nonfiction, right? How many names is too many? It doesn't have to be a number, but I think you get what I'm asking. Rita.
I'd stick to the lead characters. And in fact, forgive me, a question about does the one page apply to fiction? And I do believe it does, although the fiction agents will be able to be more authoritative about it. But remember, this isn't a plot line. The query letter is not the whole plot. It is a compressed description of the essence of a work. And usually when you use that that filter, a lot becomes superfluous for the purpose of pitch, of the pitch. It really is the heart of it that you're after. It's not about the entire storyline, it's the essence.
Great, thank you. Sam?
Sorry, I was reading some of these chat questions. What was the question?
That's right. If you see anything you really want to answer immediately, feel free to answer in the chat. We are cataloging them, and I am going to be introducing them actually in just a few minutes. But if you do see a question you want to answer, go for it. The question was, how many characters do you want to see named in a query?
So I think I agree with Rita in that I want to know, I mean, if it's nonfiction, it's basically whatever your book is about. And if it's going to be a bunch of people, then you might want to summarize why, their story needs their kind of contribution, so that that might be a little longer. But for most fiction queries, what I want to know is who is the protagonist? What is going to be the main kind of series of obstacles that they're going to have to overcome in order to get what? And well, in other words, what are the stakes? So I want to know what that arc might look like, but I only want a little bit, and I only really want the main character. If there's 3 different protagonists, it might be, you could say this person tries to do this person's trying to stop them, this other person's connected in this way, so that I could see their relationship. But I wouldn't want to feel like it's like all of a sudden I'm at a wedding and I'm trying to figure out the relationship of everybody there to the bride and groom. I don't want that feeling at all. I want to know that I'm close to everybody here and there's a connection.
Gina, I see a lot of nodding from you.
Yeah, there are times when you feel like you're getting the cast of characters from a playbill or something. Because there's a lot of multiple point of view novels, I do want to know all the characters where I'm going that are major points of view. If it's a dual point of view, I want to have both of those characters. And a bit about whoever the antagonist is. I recently got a book in where I actually felt like I needed to know a little bit about 5 characters, because it was kind of an ensemble book, and it was about a true story of 5 people climbing some horrible mountain where everybody dies, sort of thing. But they all bring something different to the story, and it's going to bounce around and tell all their stories. So I kind of needed to know, why were they all so important to this story? Why was this, this going to be emotionally engaging, that I knew each one of them and what they were bringing to that mountain face, and in that terrible storm. So that was the one case where I was like, I actually wanted to know about 5 characters, but not a lot. I mean, like 1 line about each one, but generally I want the major point of view characters. If there's 2 or 3, I'm going to want to know a little bit about each of them.
I kind of love that we can't ever give a hard and fast answer for everything, because that shows how this is art. There isn't a single widget that you can always put in the widget hole. Everybody's got to find their own unique way of doing this. And speaking of unique, we have so many wonderful audience questions that we are going now to pivot to them. First one I want to talk about, I think this is a great question. If an author has an idea, or a writer has an idea about how to sell the writer's book, like particularly the target audience and maybe even general research about that, would you want to see that in a query? Or would you prefer the author to kind of hold that? And let's see, I think we're starting with, now I've lost the track, Sam?
I mean, I'm assuming this is a nonfiction book where you've figured out the kind of, you've done your homework and you figure out in your marketing plan, these are the people that really need this book for whatever reason. I think.
But sorry if I can just clarify. I suspect though that they could be thinking of, well, this is for readers of Nora Roberts or something like that too. Could it also apply to fiction?
If it's that short, you could put that in the query. If it's like readers of this or readers of X or Y. If it's something more complicated, I think a little hint of it saying that, I sold a book to Hachette last year, and it was on managing your thyroid, like especially for women, managing thyroid dysfunction. So it was like healing your autoimmune diseases naturally, healing your thyroid naturally without any meds. And so one of the important things that the author had pitched me, and I in turn pitched the publisher, was that this thing is increasing at such a rapid rate that this book is really needed, especially if somebody's looking for a natural solution, like a lifestyle change or diet change or whatever, rather than just popping a bunch of meds. So books like that are, from like a doctor, say, or some kind of expert, if you can use your expertise to say, this is a major trend that this book will address, that's really good to know right up front.
Wonderful, thank you. Gina?
Okay, for nonfiction, yes, at some point we're going to need a marketing plan. That'll be part of it. It's more important for me to love the book than be convinced that you know how to sell it. So first thing first, let me get into the book, sell me on the book. And I'm talking specifically about fiction now because Sam addressed nonfiction, and I'm sure Rita will too. So with fiction, I usually discover quickly that the author has very little idea of how to sell anything when it comes they're not really, they have some idea. They're like, I could do this. So they come up with these ideas about how to sell things, but leave that part to the experts. Let us know what your platform is. Yes, absolutely. Let us know what your platform is. If you have any special connections with media, if you've got great blurbs, that's great. I want to know all of that. But the actual mechanics of how to kind of push your book is probably something that we're going to end up leaving to the publisher if it's fiction, and they probably have more of an expertise in that. But yeah, bring in your platform. Let me know if you know 15 great best-selling authors who are all going to give you a blurb, and you're like really cozy with people who like to do huge podcasts and stuff. Let me know that in your marketing plan.
All right, Rita, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking in particular of a book I represent that'll be coming out in October, tied to coping with miscarriage. And 1 out of 4 women have had a miscarriage. Now that's an enormous number. And because it's a subject that hasn't been talked about historically, it's an important conversation to have. The author has good street cred tied to the project. And of course, that was in the query letter from her to me, but also she and from us to the eventual publisher. But she named people we've all heard of who have had miscarriages, and she kind of elevated the topic that way. I think that was a letter that was packaged in a way to get my attention right away. It was all there. She herself had experienced miscarriages and now is the mother of 2 kids. So she understood the topic from important dual perspectives. And I think that added gravitas to the project. I also knew that this was going to be a very hard project to sell because publishers, I assumed, thought this was covered, that it was a shameful topic, still not openly discussed, and that women look on the web to cope. And we were hoping to defy that. So we had to be smart about it. And we had to use the numbers to our advantage. But I think whenever there's a demographic involved that helps put it out there in a very blunt, bold way, adoption, suicide, it could be happy stuff too. It's not all grief related. Then that helps wrap around our head about a potential demographic of readers and help us understand the potential for the work. I think maybe that's the crux of it, that when we read a query letter, if it's successful, we're already thinking, who are the prospective publishers for this? We ignite. Who are the prospective publishers for this? How much juice does it have? What's its inborn energy that we can seize and run with? And demographics definitely play a part. And at the same time, I've handled rich niche books, small demographic, very targeted books, drafting design for the entertainment stage. I mean, that's very niche, but it was a valid book with a renewable market. So there's that too. But if you're looking for a general trade book that's going to be saleable to a mainstream publisher, you do want to make sure you do have to illustrate that the demographics are real, measurable, and that you do know how to reach them. Not all in the query letter, but enough so that we can wrap our heads around it if we're not innately familiar with the topic and its reach.
Thank you. This round robin has made me dizzy, and I can't remember if Sam answered this question or not. Did you?
Yeah, I think I did, because I was
Okay.
talking about the doctor and
That's right.
thyroid. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So the next question we have from the audience is, they're very curious about numbers. How many clients do you work with at once, and how many new writers might you take on in a given year? And so Gina, then, if you don't mind starting us there.
No, I don't mind. The thing with working differently with fiction and nonfiction. A nonfiction agent can have many clients. Sometimes they have a client that comes on for one big book, and it will be 5 years later before they have another book, because they're doing research, and it's, so that's very intensive. So you may find that agents who handle a lot of nonfiction may have 150, 175 clients, but you only hear from them once every 10 years. So it doesn't matter that you have so many. When you're dealing with fiction, especially when you have authors that are super prolific, they can eat your life. I swear to God, there are people I talk to every day of my life, holiday, weekend, night. They're up my, like my girl every day. Those are high that date, but they need it. They need that time. There's a lot going on. We have a lot moving. We have 4 series, 5 series, crap going on with subrights. So in those cases, I usually handle somewhere between 30 and 50 clients. And that's it. I'm also like the managing partner here, so I've got a lot of responsibilities other than managing my own clients. I'm managing everybody else's stuff too. When I'm heavier on nonfiction, the number goes up. When I'm heavier on fiction, the number has to go down. How many new clients would I look at in the course of a year? Right now, my list is pretty full, so you'd have to really knock it out of the park. I'm not going to set a certain number, but right now, because my list is fairly full, we're all fairly established agents, right? So we're not going to be taking on the huge number of new clients in the course of a year that a brand new agent's going to, because our time is very precious. So it would have to be somebody who we felt super excited about. We were very passionate about the project. So maybe 2 or 3 at the most, new clients in the course of the year. And there'll be long stretches when I'll just feel like I don't have the bandwidth to take anyone on for a while, unless, I know I could immediately turn around and sell it to this person with very little work. So that's the reality of working with agents who are a little bit more crammed in their schedules already.
Thank you, Rita.
Well, I do typically sell on the basis of a proposal. I read the proposal from beginning to end to make sure it's perfected before I send it out. So there's very much a process. I'm not just a trafficker. But I have to say that because, and some of you know it, because we get paid in installments, you all get paid in installments, part on signing of a contract, delivery, possibly publication, and possibly further publication down the line if paperback comes out, that it's a very long stretch before we'll be remunerated. And for that reason, the pipeline has to be full. We could not survive otherwise. I couldn't. I'm working with maybe 18 clients at various stages, the way Gina is saying, at any given time. I am able to handle it all. And I have to say that for query letters, it is an open door policy. I find a lot in my regular, I don't call it slush, I call it over the transom submissions, because there's gold in them, they're hills. And I wouldn't want to demean it by calling it, dirty snow. But I think that the joy of the thrill, frankly, of discovery that comes with, wow, this is at my doorstep, and I have the chance to represent this fabulous work, is actually the thrill that keeps us going with all the hardship, with COVID, with all the complications, with all the movement in the industry, the musical chairs of it, the consolidation. I can tell you that's part of the troubleshooting we do every day. There's no stasis. There isn't just like a flat line of activity. it's always in movement and always having to compensate for a lot of that movement that's not welcomed. So maybe 18 clients, give or take. And I think that the number is actually very misleading anyway. And then an open door policy. When I'm very interested in working with new talent. I work with a lot of first time authors and love it when I can do their second book, third book, fourth book. As I said, the shorthand's in place. We've done the grooming part and now we're off to the races.
That's so fun.
Those metaphors aren't too mixed over there. Sorry about that.
No. The more the merrier. Before we get to Sam's answer, I just want to cue Elizabeth, where we're going to let Sam answer this question, and then Elizabeth, who is now sort of waiting in the wings, will be ready to do her pitch for you all. So Sam, tell us what you think.
So I think every agent decides how they are comfortable like working with writers in terms of, are they going to be the main agent or are they going to work within an agency? And one of the things that happened to me was I loved when I had worked at a bigger agency and then I went out on my own, and I loved the startup stage where I was signing people like crazy and I was excited, and I knew I was kind of thinking, oh, that won't be ready till then. Like that one is even 6 months out. Like you kind of have this pipeline that Rita was talking about. But I quickly reached the point where I had about 40 or 50 clients. Actually, it was even before that. I think when I reached 20, I said, oh, I can't do anymore. And then somehow I doubled that within like a year or two. And then I think now I might have 60 or 70 clients. And then what I'm doing now is I started to hire other agents because I thought I want to keep going. I don't want to say no to anybody that's good. I want to pass them along and have them within the organization. And so the agency now has 8 agents, including a film and TV agent and a couple kids agents, so that we're trying to accommodate everything that people send to us and that we think is good. So I don't know where we're going to stop, but I feel like there's going to be a point where I won't be able to, like, as an agent, you have to make that decision about managing versus representing the authors yourself. And I feel like it gets really hard. Like, I don't know how the senior partners at the big agencies do it, because I can't even imagine what their day looks like, because you become an agent because you love this kind of one-on-one with a writer where you're looking at the pitch and you're looking at the proposal and you're like, no, I think this is wrong, we need to fix this, and I think this is we'll get a better response from the market, and this would maybe put you in closer to being a bestseller, what about this or that? And then you don't do that with like at the point I'm at now, I'm looking at resumes. I mean, I'm looking to hire people. I want to build a book to film and TV department, so I'm thinking like, who in LA should I poach from another agency? So it's a different kind of way of looking at what you're trying to accomplish. So I do miss that, the kind of closeness, and I still have a few clients that I'm like that with, but it's a very different experience. I mean, I think you guys would agree with me that the people that came in early that had a lot of your time, that kind of friendship and intimacy that you have with them, it almost never happens again later on. Like, you kind of want everybody to be your best friend that you're working with, but it gets harder and harder as you get more clients.
Thank you for sharing that sort of behind the scenes personal approach. I really appreciate that. Next up, we have a brave pitcher. Because this is a panel on queries and folks are here on queries, maybe we can kind of imagine that we're reading her query, or that she's reading her query instead of pitching it, but it's still a pitch. The way this is going to work is Elizabeth is going to give a pitch that is no longer than 2 minutes. We're really trying to keep this short. And then I'm going to ask each of you, starting with Rita, I think, to give really just 1 minute of feedback, if you could. We've got 30 minutes left in the panel, and we're hoping to just dedicate 5 minutes to each of the practices so we can get as many questions in as we can. So with that, Elizabeth, if you want to unmute yourself and let us know what you have.
Great. The day Alicia achieves her life's dream is the day she realizes it isn't really what she wants. But since she's a musician, she's specialized herself into a path that she can't easily abandon. Meanwhile, Henry is a concert pianist, or desperately wants to be, but he lacks the easy talent of someone like Alicia. In my debut novel manuscript, If With All Your Heart, these two characters meet, but rather than being jealous of one another, They're instead mutually fascinated. As their paths diverge and they pursue separate careers and separate love interests, neither can forget the impression the other one made. Eventually, Alicia brings her influence to shine a spotlight on Henry's career, but the results are disastrous and leave both characters questioning what happens when career identity ends and self-identity begins. In some ways, this novel is the American answer to Sally Rooney's Normal People. Like that novel, mine has a can't let go love interest that structures the tension between these two storylines. However, mine also brings a philosophical depth as I pull from perspectives including existentialism, religious faith, and even internet buzz to bear on my dissection of the myth of follow your heart. Furthermore, in a voice-driven landscape, I feel that my book will stand out because it is a book of ideas, but has a pull of deep feeling. My music writing has already found an audience in the US and the UK. I wrote a year-long column for McSweeney's about playing the tuba, and 2 different BBC programs solicited work from me based on this column. My fiction appears in Virginia Quarterly Review. I have an MFA in fiction from George Mason University. And in my day job, I've worked in creative marketing for Bath & Body Works, Nordstrom, and JP Morgan Chase. So I'm looking forward to bringing my knowledge of marketing to selling this book, and I'm looking for a partner to help me do that. I really hope it might be one of you, and thank you for listening, and thank you to the Washington Writers Conference for this opportunity.
Wonderful, thank you, Elizabeth. Rita, can you share your thoughts?
Elizabeth, I enjoyed your pitch, but I think I want to defer to the fiction agents who will be able to pinpoint what's working and what might not be, but I enjoyed the pitch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam?
You said 2 things that I liked. One is McSweeney's. I've had a few of my writers who I think are brilliantly funny in McSweeney's, and I'm really proud of them for that. The second thing is Sally Rooney. I feel like somebody trying to even do something that she's doing and failing might be worth looking at, because I think she's so specialized. I would look at this. I think there's enough there. I don't know whether it's going to be a bad romance or, you know, you were very vague about the story itself, about this relationship between these 2 people. But, you know, what I tell everybody that has an interesting pitch is we will look at it and we will write you, like, we're kind of crazy at our agency, but we will write you an editorial letter to tell you what you need to do for us to be interested. So, but the problem is, before the pandemic, like, I used to have in my office, I used to have a team of like 5 young kids from publishing programs and me, and we would just be like, okay, who's doing this? You're doing that. And it was just kind of fun. But now it's me on my sofa here, and it's just a lot slower. So I can only say, Elizabeth, if you send it, it might be a few months, and I'm sorry to say that, but we will look at it and eventually.
Thank you.
Better. Gina?
I appreciated you have the background. You're bringing your personal life experience to the story, and obviously it would inform it. I did feel the story felt, and some of you who are listening to the panel may have gotten this feedback about your novels. It felt quiet, and I didn't get a great sense of the conflict that ever between the characters. They meet, they're attracted to each other, they're fascinated by each other. We don't know why they wander apart at that point and have their, you know, why are they not together? And then when they come back together again, and she's using her, I guess, her career platform to try to assist him, something disastrous happens. But I don't really have a sense of, was it career disaster? Was it personal disaster? Was it just like emasculating for him? What went wrong? So I think the pitch that, you know, and I'm giving you feedback on the pitch specifically because I haven't read the book. I think we need a greater sense of the energy between the characters so that we understand. We need to fall in love with these characters. We need to care what happens to them. We need to care that their relationship, you know, should work. We want it to work, and then something horrible happens that busts it apart at the end. So, and I didn't get the chance to really feel engaged because I wasn't getting a sense of what was the problem to start with. So I probably would have had to pass on that because I wasn't getting that keen sense of what the narrative engine is that's driving this story. And it's probably just a little bit too quiet for me. I'm Sicilian. I'm big into conflict. I'm being loud conflicts. So I think that I need to understand the characters a little bit better. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone for that feedback. So now what we're going to do is ask one or two more audience questions, and then we're going to turn to Fatima for her pitch. So there's some questions about etiquette when querying, particularly from the querier's standpoint. I know this is always tough for folks. Somebody mentions that they might have submitted a full manuscript and then not heard back. In general, what sort of etiquette do you recommend in terms of asking for follow-up, in terms of saying thank you and things like that? How should writers interact with you? Rita, please.
I think a good source is every agent or agency's website. Very often under submission guidelines, you'll see what the turnaround time is likely to be. If it exceeds it based on when you submitted the query or proposal or manuscript based on what the guidelines recommend. If that time is exceeded by, buffer it a bit, 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks or even more, it is appropriate to check in. There are times when it's buried in the email slog, and an agent will appreciate hearing. If you don't hear back after multiple inquiries about the status of the work, I'd say you probably won't hear back. And I think we've all experienced this in a way that starts to feel shameful. Very often, no answer is a no. So, we've all had to deal with that. But it does behoove you to follow up in a professional way. I'm resending this just in case you didn't get my first inquiry, etc. Keep it short and professional.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything on that one? Gina, please.
If you're going to follow up on a query, resend the query. Don't make us go look for it. So just when you follow up, either attach or just send the original query, or if it's a submission, just resend everything so that we have it right at the top of our inbox. Remind us when we requested it. Don't call. There are people that call, I think, because especially during the pandemic, they think the rules don't apply anymore. Don't call the agency to ask about your submission, and don't call just to a week or so later. I get this a lot too. I want to check in to see if you got it. You didn't acknowledge receiving it. So, I'm not pushing for an answer, but no, don't do that. But Rita gave very good advice. It's usually on the agency's website what their standards are as far as response time. So, just following that makes sense. But if you do follow up, you don't hear, just assume, if they were very, very, we're either super busy and we can't get to everything, or for some reason that's just not at the top of our priority list. So it's probably not the best match or something. So I think, yeah, it's probably a no answer is probably going to be a no. We don't try to do that. It's not our intention, but the number of queries that we're all getting have exploded, especially this year. And it's almost impossible to keep up with the volume that we're seeing. I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's really good to know. So one more question, and then we'll turn to Fatima. What about plot twists and spoiler type things? How much of the plot do you want to see in a query? Sam, can we start with you?
I'm very specific about this in that if I'm going to read your book, I want to be able to enjoy it, especially if it's fiction, and I don't want to really know too much. I kind of want enough to be intrigued enough to say, let me read this. And then if I get bored, then I'll just say, sorry, it didn't hold my attention. But I don't want to get any big twists or reveals that's going to ruin it for me and my enjoyment of it. Because before I represent something, I want to have enjoyed it and share that way that I enjoyed it with the editors and the readers that come after me to say, you're going to love this book, right? What motivates me as an agent is I'm like a super fan that says, I read this book. I think everybody has to read it. I'm going to make it happen. That's kind of my main motivation as an agent. That's how I started. So I was an editor and a publisher who just thought, I want to reach even more people with you know, by instead of me publishing it myself and making beautiful little books that nobody's going to buy, which actually happened. It was a sad part of my career. But then I thought, why don't I get it to the Penguin Random Houses of the world, and they can do their magic. So then, you know, you want to have a bigger game. So I don't want it ruined at all. I want to know enough to be intrigued, kind of like that thing that I said about the guy that comes to an alternate world that is much darker than the one he knows.
Thank you. Gina?
Often just the inciting incident is enough for me. Like when I was pitching my colleague Paula's mystery, the first book in the series, just the fact that this wounded, you know, vet and her dog with PTSD from the war were wandering in the woods, and this is a bomb sniffing dog, and the dog alerts to explosives in the woods on her property, and where he's alerting, they find an abandoned infant. You know, it was like, okay, you know, and now we're off to the races. So that was really all I needed for Paula to tell me she says, I have this idea for a book, and here's the opening scene. And that's all I had to tell editors, was that opening scene. They were intrigued enough because it was there. You had an emotional engagement, you have an abandoned baby. Where are the explosives? Why is the dog learning to explode? So there's a threat, this inherent threat. So that's enough. Just that inciting incident usually is enough. I need a little bit of background, but don't tell me the whole story. I want to know. I want like, you know, like Sam did, I want to be, you know, the excitement. I want to know that I've got this great story coming, and it's going to unravel in front of me, like, you know, very intriguing manner. So don't tell me too much. Thank you.
Makes sense. Rita, is that the case for nonfiction, or is there any kind of different approach?
Well, I think I want to know what I'm selling, what I'm potentially selling. So if you're withholding a conclusion in the pitch letter that's important to my appreciation of the work, it might be less of a compelling absence than a flawed absence in a way. I should know what I'm selling. That's my take. And I don't want to have to read it to know. I want to know, in fact, if the end is worthy of my own taking on of this work. So the whole gestalt is better for me to know, I think.
That makes perfect sense. All right, so now we've got our next brave pitcher. Fatima, please take it away.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. In many ways, my YA urban fantasy novel and its main character reflect my unique background, such as illustrating the power inherent in a handwritten letter, or my teaching at University of Maryland. Through avid reading and syllabi development for my global literature, social change, and gender studies courses, I've noticed a frustrating lack of female South Asian characters in YA fiction, particularly fantasy, though authors like Sabaa Tahir and Roshani Chokshi have sought to correct this. I revolve my work around a character whose Pakistani American identity is a mere fact, like the color of a character's hair, rather than the only defining part of her identity. I believe the market is ripe and a niche waiting just to be filled for an urban fantasy that coincidentally has a South Asian female protagonist. My approximately 76,000 word YA urban fantasy novel is entitled Wind Reapers, which I hope will be the first installment of our quartet called the Facade Chronicles. So here it is. What do you do when you reap lies on the wind's orders, but someone else starts brutally eliminating your targets and framing you for the murders? Team up with your worst enemies and grab some chocolate, because when the fate of the world relies on a handful of disintegrating epistles, sugar may just be the only thing keeping you sane. 17-year-old Isa lives a fairly normal life in quiet Lawrenceville, Georgia. Oh, except for a glitch in her DNA that allows her to hear the wind's arcane language and carry out its orders as a part of an elite assassin group spread across the globe. While most humans deny the existence of mythical creatures, Isa silently reaps the souls with her custom blades before casually walking into first period AP camp. She enjoys the hunt just as much as creating Rube Goldberg machines with her younger sister, or helping her mother whip up a new batch of dessert samosas, until a group of gremlin-like Alps are burned alive in downtown Atlanta for no discernible reason. According to fellow assassin Zane, it's the 7th such occurrence in the past year. Highly skilled and darkly enthralling, Zane and his affinity for cruelly torturing his targets has already gouged scars in Isa's psyche. Yet when he reveals his suspicions, she has no choice but to join him, and a selfish Alp who escaped the slaughter in order to protect not only wind reapers, but all living beings, magical or not, even risking her life to pry answers out of a sly genie in Pakistan. Yet, as she painstakingly searches for the truth in unfamiliar countries and discovers the power of a well-written letter, she realizes she may be forced to reveal that she isn't quite as human as everyone believes, that she possesses a little magic that may help destroy the current world and raise a more terrible one in its place.
Thank you, Fatima. We'll do Sam and Gina, and then Rita, if you want to weigh in, you can feel free. Thank you.
It was a little convoluted, and I kind of wish you got to the I think Gina has a great thing about this, which is give us the inciting incident. And I wish that we had that first to kind of get our attention before you got into the kind of preamble about, a representation or where you want to your motivations. It's kind of like what I want to know is, who is this character and why should we care about them and what is happening to them and what are the stakes for them? And I think you went a little fast in terms of when you were reading it, because I was like trying to catch up. But
Sure.
So I mean, it's hard if you're nervous and whatever and you're performing here. But if from what I understand, I feel like this category is really tough right now. That there was a lot of urban fantasy that was out there in the YA market, and so many of the kids editors I'm talking to are looking for, believe it or not, more picture books in middle grade rather than YA. But I can tell you that I actually have a new agent who only has one client. So you would be like half of her list if she signed you. But if you go to the Rights Factory, her name is Tasneem Motala, and Tasneem is looking for I'm pretty sure she's Muslim too. She's looking for BIPOC writers writing children's books. So you would be exactly what she's looking for, and having a Muslim character or Pakistani character might be interesting to her. So check her out if you're interested. Look her up on Query Manager, send her a note, say that I thought you guys might be a good fit. She's being pitched a lot. The last I heard, Writer's Digest wrote a little profile about her looking for stuff, and then she got like 100 queries in the next day. So it's a little crazy, but you're exactly what she's looking for. I don't know how interested she would be. I know that she's looking for fantasy specifically, and I think she has it described. If you look her profile up in Writer's Digest, her favorite story, which kills me because I'm not this specific, but I love that I have an agent working for me that is that specific. She says her favorite story is like like enemies becoming lovers. I'm like, what? Is this a thing? I mean, anyway, so apparently that's a thing. But yeah, I feel like if you focus on the character, make them sympathetic to us, and then give them a challenge that seems insurmountable, then that's really all you need to do.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Gina, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I agree with Sam. I felt that the pitch felt a little unfocused, a little muddy. I couldn't grasp what the tone was. At times it felt like it was almost comic, with some of the comments. And I'm not sure if that's the tone throughout the entire story. I think here, well, okay. So I would love to see some comp titles. You included some of the authors who are writing South Asian protagonists, but I didn't really know if you meant to use them as comp titles or just understanding like here we're making some inroads, but there's still a lot of room that needs to be covered. Yeah. So I think if you could pull a couple of comp titles from the past couple of years, especially for the voice and the tone, I think that would be super helpful in allowing us to grasp where you're going with this.
Yeah, those were actually comp titles as well. It's just that I wanted to cut it down because I didn't want to go over, which I ended up doing anyway. So I appreciate that, Gina.
Yeah, I think it sounded like an interesting book. I agree with Sam. It's going to become a very crowded shelf very quickly right now. So it's harder and harder to find those spaces. So the more details, I kind of felt when I said it felt a little muddy, I wasn't getting the details. It didn't feel sharp to me. The storyline didn't feel sharp. I wasn't able to really visualize what was going on. Her special talent of hearing the wind, I want to know, how has that affected her life? I mean, has she grown up thinking she's crazy because she hears the, how has that affected her? Because like later on, she learned she's not entirely human later in the story. So, I mean, when you go through your whole life knowing you're like, not like anyone you know, are you ashamed? Are you told not to talk about it? Or is it something, you know, so this will have shaped her as a person through her entire life. So I want to kind of get a feel for her as a character coming into this with this very unique talent. What has this done to her? So she's coming in, is she damaged? Is she a little afraid of being herself? Is she hiding this aspect of herself?
Dina,
So
I just want to,
Mhm.
sorry, we're going to have to,
Sorry, Carrie.
that's okay. I know it's so exciting to pick this apart, but I want to be mindful of time because we are going to end at 8:30.
Excellent.
So thank you. Thank you, Fatima. Rita, I'm assuming
Thank you,
that you
everyone.
have anything to add. All right, great. A couple of quick questions, and then we'll do our last pitch. The first one is on what we were talking earlier about prior writing experience. So some of the attendees were wondering, does ghostwriting count? Do academic peer-reviewed journals count? If any of you have any thoughts, I think I want to start with Rita on this one for the nonfiction element.
I do think so. I mean, I use what you have. It might not be of an especially super high caliber, but it's what you've got. But it, you know, you shouldn't. I've ghost written my mother's memoir, which we self-published 10 years ago. That's not going to really have any weight. But anything that is credible and maybe even trackable. And you know, another thing is, I often Google the name of the writer who's written to me to see what's out there, what's going on, how are they presenting to the world, and how is the world codifying them in a way. And it's nice when I see credits beyond what the author is pitching me and the way they're explaining themselves. So I think that you've got to use what you have. Hopefully it's of a certain caliber that actually makes a difference in my appreciation of them. Don't hold back. If it's tied to writing in some way, ghostwriting is a skill. So definitely include that.
Thank you. Sam, do you have anything to add, and particularly for fiction writers? What if they've got a writing that's not exactly in fiction, but is still something published?
You know, it's a good question. Sometimes journalists come to me with fiction, but they can't really write fiction. The thing that we normally say at our agency is that you can learn anything about writing except how to make a character that people connect with, that people have, you know, empathy for. And so if somebody's even written nonfiction books and trying to write a novel that I don't feel is really working that way, like I'm not feeling like the character, I'm not feeling a connection, I'll just say that, you know, it might get you through the door saying I published this book or that book and I'm working on this thing, but I still need to feel like compelled by the sample that I have, the work that I have.
Right. So I'm going to let Gina answer that question, but before she does, just queuing up that we're going to have Kathy coming up next. And then after Kathy gives her pitch and we do some quick feedback, I'm going to conclude with one final question for the panel. And so Gina, what do you think?
Okay, absolutely. I want to know what you've written before, but I agree with Sam. If it's something that has absolutely no bearing on the manuscript, if you've done this, you know, if you've done a textbook and you're writing a YA novel, you know, it really has no bearing on it. But just give me all of it. Let me figure out what is important and what's not. But give me all of your credits. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And now, Kathy, if you could step on stage.
Hi. Glass Cedars is a novel that mirrors in some ways what is happening now worldwide. Deeply divided populations exploited by powerful players. 20-year-old Maya is given 1 hour to pack one suitcase and flee her home in Beirut, leaving behind the people she loves and everything she's ever known. She completes her studies in Los Angeles and launches a successful career in the male-dominated aerospace industry. In spite of a good life and meaningful friendships in Los Angeles, she's unable to shake off her heritage and returns to Lebanon. In Beirut, she reunites with family, friends, and falls in love, enduring danger and heartbreak in her once beautiful war-torn country. This is a tale of people and human relationships, particular in time and place, but universal in essence and deeds. I grew up in Lebanon, and although fictionalized, this is my story.
Thank you, Kathy. And Gina, if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback first.
Sure. I felt like I was intrigued at the beginning of the story. And then when she comes to the United States and she becomes influential in the aerospace industry, and then goes back, I kind of felt a little bit like I'm losing the train of her story, of her arc, because it feels like that is taking me out of, you know, that experience. I understand it's your story and you fictionalized it. It's a real human story, but I kind of felt a little bit disjointed with the plot of it. And so I need to understand more at that point when she's in the US and working. How is this influenced? How is this relate back to the beginning and later the end of the story where she returns to Beirut? Because it kind of felt like it felt episodic. It felt like there are different parts of her life with nothing to do with each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rita, do you look at memoir on your list?
Yes, I do represent memoir.
So if we can just pretend that Kathy hadn't pitched this as fiction, but rather as memoir, just for the sake of the group, could you give some feedback on that?
A little tuned to what Gina was saying. I felt that the American chapter was without tension or enough activity that was novelistic and kept the tension, you know, it kept the interest, that there was that beginning and end. For Lebanon, that was where the excitement was. And when we were away from that, it was less exciting. So I think for this to be meaningful, all of it has to count. There can't be substantial differences in weight for the midsection of the story. Got to figure that out, that it's all of interest. If not equal interest, then at least active interest. It's all got to be interesting.
Thank you. Sam, do you want to add anything?
I kind of get like a red flag if somebody says, this is my novel, but it all really happened or most of it happened. And the reason is because if something really happened to you and then you say, I'm going to make it into fiction, and you're talking to an agent about the work, and the agent says, why don't you change this? Because this part doesn't actually make sense for this to be a novel. And then the thing that I usually get is somebody will then say, no, but it actually really happened. And that gravity of that really happening is what makes the story meaningful. But then I'm like, but it's not a memoir. So well, the moment you change genres into fiction, then all the rules of good fiction apply, and you have to forget about whatever was real and what wasn't. And that's really hard for people. So I would say, if the story is really good as a memoir, maybe it's better as a memoir. And then you have the gravity of everything that really happened. If you want to make stuff up, then you might have to be open to, like Rita was saying, maybe the American part isn't that interesting. Maybe somebody that goes to school and excels isn't that interesting. Maybe the challenge is like when they are in Beirut, where maybe bombs are going off, and maybe there's the idea of a romance that there wasn't before. Those things are the kinds of drama and intrigue that makes fiction worth, makes us really compelled to read a character's journey in fiction rather than in memoir.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kathy, for pitching. And thank you, Sam, for saying that. I think that's really helpful for probably a lot of people in the audience to hear. I'm going to ask one really quick question, and we're going to try to squeeze in maybe a minute just after the deadline here. But I think this is a fun one. Is there any particular time of the week or time of the year that is a good time to get queries? So let's see, Rita, I see you shaking your head, so I'm going to start with you.
I think there are some bad times to send queries. New Year's Eve, Christmas Day. I mean, just be thoughtful about it. People send queries on Friday. I don't answer that on Friday night. I don't answer them on Friday night. I realize that with the web that people are, available all the time, or at least their email is. But, I think it's appropriate to send it during a work time when it is more likely to be answered, by those who try to keep normal hours, so to speak. And that's all a fantastical statement right there. But even so, avoid the holidays when people are trying to disengage. I mean, people who are really doing their best to have work-life balance. What can I say?
Thank you. Any other tips on that point?
I just want one anecdote to bring up, which is that because of the pandemic and because I couldn't see my mom, for example, at Christmas, I actually signed somebody that sent me something, I think just before the holidays, and I had it sitting in my inbox and I thought, what is this thing? And I was so bored doing my work. I opened it up and I started looking at it. And then after the first chapter, the next thing I knew, I was like halfway through and I said, wow, this is so I ended up signing it, the manuscript, and it was the voice that got me. But I don't think that normally over the holidays, I'm with Rita. Usually you have so many family obligations and, things that you're doing, but the pandemic kind of, like I said, I'm stuck on the sofa here now. So if somebody says me something good and I'm not pitching actively, which for most of December, we don't do anyway, because nobody's going to respond, right? I don't want to kind of assault an editor by sending them a manuscript like a week before Christmas. So, it's a great time for me to just catch up on my reading and make sure all my clients are not going to fire me and, doing all that kind of stuff. So, but it kind of worked in an interesting way, this pandemic Christmas.
Gina, did you want to add anything?
I'm going to give really random advice. I find that Monday and Tuesday mornings are usually the time when I'm rested, just came in off the weekend. I'm probably going to look at things a little bit more favorably than Thursday at 5 o'clock when I'm exhausted and I'm just wishing Friday wouldn't happen. So that's the best time to communicate with me. If you want me to have a smile on my face, would be Monday and Tuesday mornings.
That's wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rita, Gina, and Sam. I really appreciate you taking the time on Tuesday night to do this for our writers. Thank you all writers for the great questions and for coming for our first virtual conference. Everyone, please be sure to join us on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time for the Pitch Perfect panel. Some of the questions we had actually were about pitches, so please reintroduce those on Thursday. We'll have Sam back again, as well as Jenny Dunman and Irene Goodman then. If anyone's not able to attend a panel, you can watch the recording that's going to be posted. And please remember, at the end of the conference, we are going to be mailing out a brief survey. So if you have any feedback, please keep it in mind. And we really do pay attention to that feedback and take it to heart. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you.